Hello, you beautiful soul, and welcome to the Voice of Intuition podcast. I'm your host, Laura Alden Cam, and I am really jazzed you're here today. We're in season 3, and I'm bringing back a series that will drip through the years going forward, and it is called Two Healers and a Mic. There are many of you listening that are healers by your very nature, and this is why I created this series. You may not be in the holistic healing arts, or maybe you are. And if you are, wonderful. But if you aren't, if you have a different type of job or occupation or whatever you do with your days, you know inside of you that healing nature that you have. And sometimes that healing nature can trip us up, make us overcommit, wear us out, inspire us to new heights that are absolutely fantastic, and our feet and our heart and our soul lifts off the ground. And then we have to figure out how to get back down here and cook dinner. And isn't that true? Being a healer is not easy, whether you do it as a profession or not. And yet, it is the most wonderful aspect of yourself. The kindness, compassion, the sensitivity, meaning that you have a highly responsive nervous system and you feel just about everything. And that's not easy, but it's worth it. It is worth the journey to understand that healer inside of you. And the people I have on this series are healers. They are working in the field of holistic arts and healing, different modalities, which is awesome, right? We all need a different approach from time to time. And these people are well known. Some are well known around the world. Some have been quietly practicing for years in their region, in their state, or wherever they are in the world. They're dedicated, they're confident, competent, compassionate human beings who started on their healer's journey, usually early in life. And one of the things I know about that healing quality that you have, that a lot of us share, is that it's not always easy to be a kid and be highly intuitive, to have a nervous system that feels everything going on in the house, at school, on your walks to school, with your friends, as you've grown up. It's not always easy. And oftentimes it gets closed down, at least dimmed significantly. And some are fortunate to keep that light going brightly throughout their childhood and adolescence. Most of us, though, experience a dark night of the soul for whatever period of time. Could be a week, could be years. Yet that phase of our lives as a healer teaches us so many things. It helps us help other people. It helps us help other healers grow and burgeon into the magnificent person and person of service that they are here to be. And again, it doesn't matter if you know a certain modality or not. You know me, I always teach and preach this. You are born with your specific and very unique methods, and you walk that path, and no one else can walk it for you. You have to grow into your methods. You stroll on your path, run, and if you're like me, you've tripped a few times, and that is the way. You are the methods, you have the path, and you do know the way. And so enjoy this first episode in season 3 of Two Healers and a Mic. And my guest is a repeat guest, Scott Clover. Scott is an intuitive healer and a guide to so many people. And I love what it says on his website, scottclover.com, in case you're interested, want to write that down. Intuitive guidance is what he offers, somatically, energetically, emotionally. Because his premise is to help us understand yourself and feel better in your body. Simple, clear truth. And he has a way of looking at energy and experiencing the process with you that allows you to unearth as he helps unearth. He's got a shovel, he's got an energetic shovel, and he can gently move away the debris and help you feel the light inside of you coming through the shadows. So we're going to start the show. Enjoy it. I send you all my love. And here we go. Scott, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. It's really good to connect with you again. It's been a while. And for those in the audience listening, give us a little information about how you got started, what you do, first of all, and how you got started in this work that you are doing.
So I'm an intuitive energy guide healer. I got started in this work knowing later in life that my intuition was coming back somewhat full force. It had been pointed out to me that, hey, you've got some psychic stuff going on. And I had realized as a child I had shut it down. And I'd shut it down pretty vehemently because I didn't feel safe other people knowing that I knew stuff, I guess. And so that happened in, I think, middle school. And it was pointed out later in life in my late 30s, hey, you seem pretty psychic to me. And I had been in total denial of it my whole life. It was sort of a denied thing in my family. My father has this, my aunt, my grandparents, or my grandfather had it. So they pretty much self-medicated their way through it in the 1900s. Right. So that's how my family dealt with it. And I said, no more. I'm not going to self-medicate. I'm going to figure this out and adapt it to living. Well, as I was doing that, I worked with many mentors, you being one of them. I took one of your classes when I first started becoming a burgeoning psychic. And that helped me understand how the inner eye works. Like I remember you teaching me a class and you talked about the triangle, the square, and the circle, and how everything we see is a visual representation of one of those three shapes. And so that vision allowed me to look elsewhere and sort of including my visionary skills. I found someone who reads the archetypal charts, and I started working with the archetypes, knowing what mine are. And mine really cater me to do what I am doing now. And I say I do what I am because I know I have healer and visionary and storyteller. So I'm able to see things and describe them back to my clients, generally in metaphor, because as you know, we get information, but we extrapolate patterns. And then we have to describe those patterns in English, but we're not receiving. Generally, I don't receive my information in English unless it's a song. And then the song is very clearly English because that song has a meaning for my client. But generally, I don't receive English. I receive energy patterns that I have to then extrapolate the information out of, hone it down to be speakable and then translatable to the client so they can understand what I'm referring to. And I think you have some aspects of that within your work as well. So once I did that, I just started my own practice and I do workshops. I have a brand called Coming Out Intuitive, which allows people to understand themselves and self-acceptance better. So it's not about be a better psychic or be a better intuitive. It's about accepting that you are. Then once that happens, the information comes through cleaner, more graceful, less arduously. And so that's where I like to help with my teachings, is teaching people to self-accept themselves, their abilities, their prowess with the intuitive, whichever clair you got. You know, there's a lot of clairs out there and people have several different aspects of clairs. And so it's not about being as psychic as me or as psychic as you or like me or like you. It's being intuitive as your own right, under your own steam, without feeling compromised or just, feeling intimidated by either utilizing those skills or saying them out loud, telling your friends and family. I mean, one of the hardest things I did was tell my friends and family that this is what I do for work. But then once I got over that, I thought, wow, there's something to this. If I had an issue with that, I generally don't have a lot of self-confidence and self-conscious issues in my life. If that was my biggest hurdle, then it's got to be a hurdle for other people. And so my one-to-one work is about healing and guiding either clients or creatives or business people through healing and accepting themselves. And then on top of that, I teach people self-acceptance. As an offshoot, I do editing, which I read scripts and manuscripts and novels and things for an energetic sense, whether they can be about magic or they can be about something intuitive. I like to read those and get the author to really refine the message. So when it's read by people like us, we know it's clean or clearer. There's a lot of hooey out there in Hollywood, and there's a lot of tropes that really don't apply to us. And it's unfortunate that keep getting repeated and keep getting repeated. So I like to review manuscripts about this kind of things and then help the author understand it better. And when that happens, I think the intuitive reader or the intuitive young kid that's reading this can get a clean ding, go, oh, that's that's an energetically congruent storyline, as opposed to something that's so asinine or outside the realm that it doesn't represent what we do.
I want to just stop there for a minute, because I think that is life-changing for people, what you're doing insofar as manuscripts and editing and bringing that clarity. To me, it's like you're changing the archetype of what intuition is and what intuitives are, what healers are. You're changing on this on an archetypical level, because you're reaching it at the energetic and the consciousness core. So I want to thank you for that, because there is a lot of misinformation, stereotypical things, 1-800 psychic. I'm sure there are lovely people there, but everybody is intuitive. Everybody has a system. Everybody is hardwired here. So thank you for that work. That's really brilliant. As long as I've known you, I didn't know you were into that right now. I know you are brilliant at rhetoric and language. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that you're doing that. But I want to circle back around to your clientele and your work with people. Is there, and this is a narrowing question, so just saying that up front, when you discover the energetic patterns and start assessing those, is there a more consistent localized area within the body or region of the body? It doesn't have to be a spot, but a region of the body that you find the most trauma-based impacts in your people? And wherever that is, how do you support them in releasing that? So 2 questions there.
Okay. I would say most people, when I help find their coagulated energy, and that can be a thought pattern, that can be a maligning energy. That means there could be some sort of like thought pattern behind why it's being held in the body. Whether you hold that hot thought pattern or it convinced you at a young age to enter your body. I do several of these a week. And once again, I don't want to be Hollywood about this, but my archetype is I have exorcist archetype. So what I'm allowed to help people do is my clients call me the energetic plumber. And what I do is I help them localize where in their body they're holding anxiety, or the body bears the brunt, or these waking the tiger, these somatic experiences that people are having. I couple that with my intuition, because I studied and trained and taught vocalizing, which is an offshoot of somatic experiencing. I taught that for 15 years, teaching people how to go into their body, listen to their bodies, feel safer in their bodies. What had then happened with me was my intuition started coming forth, and now I can see where their energy is coagulated. So I can guide them to that area, and then we actually have a conversation with the entity, with the spirit, with the energy ball, whatever it is. It generally has a shape and a color, a vibration, I ask. And then I explain to the client where it is, they see and sense it, and then I ask them how do they prefer to remove it. And we will actually have an actual discourse. We will speak to it out loud, because vibration, things prefer to be said. If you're trying to change energy, say it out loud. A lot of people think to themselves, if you're alone in your car, say it out loud. Let the universe feel the vibration. So I help guide them through that extrication or removal process of whatever that energy is. Now, to your question, it can be anywhere. It can be in the shoulder, the ribs, the anus, the second chakra, the L2, if you were sexually put upon as a child. Generally, you have some L2, L3 issues, and that's very Louise Hay. But that's pretty spot on too. When I read their L2 is maligned, I pretty much know they have some sort of sexual history as a child that wasn't appropriate or was before their time, shall we say. And so when we ask for those things to be removed, we pretty much tell them that we are, separating the contract. I would say 8 times out of 10, when we ask the energy, when did you enter the body? It says definitely before the age of 7. So it's anywhere from 1 to 7 it enters. And 8 times out of 10, it enters under false pretenses. So if I ask it its name, it tells us its name, and I've heard every name. And then I say, did you arrive in my body under false pretenses? And the client will ask that directly. And 8 to 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yes, yes, I did. So these imaginary friends that we have growing up, or when you see your friends' children play with their imaginary friends, a lot of times that's an energy pattern that has a basic consciousness that bonds with the child's psyche, that enters the body, and can really cause harm over the years. And so that's one aspect of the exorcism or the extrication of energy from a somatic standpoint. The other side I get is the gut. And people talk a lot about the gut this, the gut that, probiotics, this and that. What they're failing to realize is the mesentery is a new organ. Now, they discovered a new organ a handful of years ago, so it's not new. It's always been there. They just didn't know about it, right? So this is another thing I get about it. But the mesentery is the sac encasing the intestines. And it has an energetic life force of its own and a protective mechanism. So it's not necessarily always the intestines that are causing the gut issues. It can be the sac inside of you that's holding the intestines, that's radiating anxiety, right?
Yes.
So if the sac is radiating the anxiety, then the intestines within it are also going to have anxiety. But the mesentery is what contracts and sends information when you go into fight or flight. The intestine itself is just doing intestinal things. So how does it receive the message? It receives the message through the network of nerves and gelatinous goo that the mesentery is, but that holds a lot of indications of where you are on the fight or flight scale. And generally, if I'm not working with like business people or consulting for those kinds of things, generally what I try to do with my clients is to help resolve or bring down their nervous system, going into parasympathetic. And that's a really hard for people to get. Sympathetic sounds like the good one, but actually sympathetic means you're heightened, you're being too sensitive. Whereas the parasympathetic is getting the nervous system to go from, extreme cases 7 down 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And a lot of times during a session, you will see the client go from like stage 4 or 5 in the scale of fight or flight, and they'll actually ratchet down a couple, and you can see the energy in their body actually sort of turn down like a Wi-Fi knob or a hi-fi knob.
It's true. And that section of the body that's around the intestinal tracts is filled with nerves, as you're noting, and also lymphatic nodules and tissue. The lymph system is very prevalent there. So it's the nervous system hitting the lymphatic system. So that's always been my understanding and premise when I put it in a very simple way. When we're impacted, the nervous system gets the impact, whether it's positive, negative, neutral, whatever we're doing. We're feeling it with the variety of our nervous systems within our body. And then that affects the endocrine system, and hormones are released. And then the immune system has to come in and clean it up. So it just moves in that circle, that triune, all of the time. And that to me is the beginning stages of health and illness and diseases, if held for a long, long time. So that's beautiful work. And I agree with you. Impacts happen everywhere in the body. It's the place that's always what's fascinating to me is the place we choose to hold them, or the place it finds inside of us where it thinks we won't be looking. So when you begin a session, like for me, just for me, I look at people from a broad point of view. At least, maybe I'm standing, even though I'm thousands of miles away, I'm positioning myself about 10 feet away from their body, and then look at a broad scope, and then just automatically drawn to the point that wants to speak up first. So what's your experience like when you first enter? Because I know your work is remote, as over the phone, as well as in person when that opportunity arises. So how do you begin your sessions, and kind of share a little bit of the sequence about how you then help people? I know you've already shared some, but start at the beginning and let us know what happens.
Okay. Well, we introduce ourselves. I get their name, their age. I find out how they found me, because I'm generally word of mouth. I don't really advertise. So people find me because they know someone who's had a session, and it's sort of advantageous. So I generally ask, how did you find me? And then I have a series of basic 8 or 9 questions. Where are you? Are you in a relationship? Do you have any children? Where did you go to high school? Now I ask these questions and they go, what? Wait, what?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
trying to get my passwords for my, bank account? No, what it is I'm reading their energy field in like a hologram. So I meet the client over the phone. I clue in a little bit before the call and I see their energy as a hologram. And then when I ask these questions, I see where it blips. And I ask these what seem innocuous or sort of basic questions, but they're about family, growing up, things like that. And so then I see where in the body is registering the answers to these questions. If it dings, I take note of it. I ask about the parents, the lineage. Did your parents like each other? That's always that's always an interesting question. Are your parents still together? Yes. Do they like each other? Well, I'm not so sure. So it's not as often as I would hope that people say, oh, my parents are together and they do like each other. And then I go from there. And then I definitely ask, are there any C-sections in the family? Because from a somatic standpoint, not having that completion energy of the birthing act for the parent and or the mother and the child, there's still a bond that needs shifting or changed. That portal needs to be gone through. And we can do that energetically if that's never been raised. But if your parent is a C-section, then they have a bond with their parent. And if you were a C-section, then you have a bond with your mother. And there's ways to energetically sort of go through that process again. And then the client feels lighter. They've accomplished something that cycle was taken away from them. When the baby is taken away or taken out of the body without the birthing process, that goes against our genetic makeup of how the process is supposed to go. And so you can tell the body to relive that and have that experience. So then that process is completed energetically. So I ask about C-sections. And then from there, I'm pretty much had figured out what we can focus on. Then I ask, did you call me for a specific reason? Like, do you have a past relationship that you can't get over? You're still bonded to someone energetically that you don't want to be because it's depleting your energy. I do a lot of those, divorces, ex-girlfriends, ex-boyfriends, kinds of things. Those are very cathartic for people. Okay. That ungrading of their energies after 4 or 5 years after your divorce, that you still can't get over something, that can have profound effects. Or for people going through a divorce and there's money issues involved, to release the energetic bond and make it more of an administrative task, it can be very helpful, particularly for women, because men have a way of dominating the process, and women get tied up in the emotions of it more, and so they feel more, if you will. And so it's very beneficial and advantageous to release those bonds so you can complete the separation process. So then from there, I ask, do you want to work on something specifically? They say yes, we go for that. And I say, or no, I can just tell you what I'm sensing and we can work from there. If that's the case, we generally find one of these entities. I would say half the time in that first session or two, we find one of those entities somewhere hanging out in your body, throwing up red flags and confusing you. And if it's never looked at from that perspective or paradigm, you're probably just not going to know it. You're going to know that something's up, but you're not going to be able to hook into what that actually is unless you have someone else like you or me or other people in our profession viewing your energy. I know for me, I can't see myself as well as I can see other people. Like I would ask you and do you notice something about me, or do I notice something about you? But it's hard for me to say, hey, Scott, what do you notice about Scott? Because I'm so prone to putting this for other people. Yeah. That I also go to other healers and make sure that, we need to clean our auric fields off because we have so many clients over time. So that's generally how it works in the session. And then we extricate, we embellish your auric field, we embolden it, I say. And you mentioned the word earlier, healing and self-esteem. To me, they're congruous or almost the same energies. So what I try to do is find where you're lacking in self-esteem in your storyline, like at age of 6 or age of 5. I can sense, oh, you had a contraction at the age of 5. Did you change schools, or did you move neighborhoods, or did you move across the country? And they go, how did you know? I was 5 and we moved, and I didn't have any friends when we moved to the new place. And so things like that, you forget from your childhood, but people like us can actually see that. And I said, my clients call me the energetic plumber because I see where your hoses are kinked. I see where your pipes are clogged energetically. And that can be definitely from when before the subconscious formed at the age of 7.
Yeah.
Harder for humans to see before that time, easier for me to see a client's timeline between 1 and 7, because I deal a lot with their subconscious. And I took some classes about a year ago now. And after taking those classes, I can't remember, MAT it was called, I think. After that, I started being able to actually engage with my client's subconscious directly. Like we can actually have a banter or a conversation. Sometimes they put little red flags up or white flags and they say, hey, look over here. Can you tell the client that I need you to, engage with this? Because I'm tired of holding this on for everybody. And I can actually see the 4, 5, 6-year-old in their mind's eye. And then we go down and connect them together. And it's really fun because when they start to see them at age 4 or 5, they're dressed shabbily and I have them redress their inner child. The child gets happier. The child grows up a few years. And that's where self-esteem can really, I said, be emboldened, because matter follows energy. You and I talk about this ad nauseum. If you can clear the energy, the matter can shift.
Yes.
It's harder to do it the other way around unless you unless you cut it out with surgery. But a lot of us are intimidated by what the current medical community has just been so easy to take a pill or go under the scalpel, as opposed to why don't you engage with it for a few months and see if you can shift it. And so that's sort of where I live, is helping people and inspiring them to engage with their engage with their self-esteem through their subconscious. And in doing so, that's where healing happens.
That's beautiful. It's so true. When I began my work, it was more exclusive to energy medicine, applied energy medicine, and doing hands-on healing, hands-off healing, remote healing, and then the consultations with it. And then the work for me just evolved over time to kind of a triage, like what's going on? We need to fix it now. Where do I need to go? What do I need to do? So what I want to talk about now, if we shift gears a little bit, and thank you for sharing all that really valuable information with us. Do you have some ideas and concepts that you send people home with that you can share with the audience today about how they can take care of themselves a little bit more from an energy point of view, from a self-awareness point of view, insofar as paying attention to their emotional intelligence, how they feel, what's going on inside of their sweet self? Can you share a little bit about some of the work that you inspire people to do when they leave a session?
Sure. So I see patterns, whether they're minute, small patterns or larger scoped patterns. And what I see in my client work, my clients are repeat generally. So I see clients on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. It's not a one-off primarily. And so what I end up saying in any given week, I say something very similar to several clients in that same week. Now, it's not because I'm just using a cookie cutter. It's because the energy out there is coming up to resolve that. It's in the air to be resolved in that moment or that sort of vibe. And what I've been saying these last couple of weeks is, and I wrote this down, I'm not changing for you. I'm being myself for me.
I like that. It's nice.
And that energy has really been coming up for a lot of my clients these last couple of weeks, because a lot of us, we have a lot of expectations put on us from other people. Yeah. Now, whether we impose their judgments on us or we judge ourselves, that changes our behavior and it changes or maligns who we actually are in self-expressing. And if you're not self-expressing authentically, you're going to feel it energetically over time. It's going to wear you down, right? We all know this. We don't react or think about it. And American society certainly doesn't want us to know, doesn't want us to repeat this very loudly, but I think we should. I think we all should talk about this. It's super important to be yourself on an energetic level, an intrinsic level, a safety issue.
Yeah.
And if you're changing yourself to make someone else feel better, that's not an authentic relationship, whether it's a partner or a family friend, a family member. So I'm going to say it again. I'm not changing for you. I'm being myself for me. So that's one of the things I've been working on lately.
That's beautiful. It's so true. Oh my goodness. It's that at those younger ages that we find those impacts. I find them too in my work. I found them in myself. It's like, what are you doing there? What happened to you? What, because one of mine was that I used to walk to school as a little kid in a small town, and there was a stream, a creek that came off of the big duck pond, and it was on the way to school, and I couldn't help myself. I would meander in the pond. I'd look for pollywogs and little frogs and stuff, and I'd often be late for school, and I got admonished for that. And it's like, what? I can't be myself. I can't go out to the stream. What? So I forget how old I was. I think it was kindergarten. I was
Yeah,
5.
you were around
So,
5 or 6.
it's
Yeah.
like, oh my God, so much happens at 5. As soon as we leave home and go to school or preschool, whatever the journey was, as soon as we get around other people, even as a little kid, when we feel something right inside of us and
Mm-hmm.
we know what feels right to us, we do at a very, very, very young, immediately, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like other people's behavior, they're not, may not be saying it, but it goes to the old adage, do as I say, not as I do. And so we feel that incongruency, and it just starts landing in different places, especially when you're
Mm-hmm.
highly empathic, and everybody's empathic. There are some out here listening and watching that are very, very empathic. So watch out for that. Maybe give Scott a call. Because that's so important to move that out and accept yourself. If what you said earlier in the beginning of our conversation, Scott, to be able to accept yourself is the primary thing about living a happy life, just being happy within yourself, within your body, no matter what your hair color is, your age, or whatever. It doesn't matter. You just got to accept yourself. And it's work to do that. It's work to do that. So when we move into that place of, or when we start moving into that place of acceptance, what kind of changes do you see in people in your work that they start, they're the kind of the turnstile moments is what I call them. When you see that turnstile starting to move in them and they're making progress, what does that kind of look like and feel like for your clientele?
I can say when they catch themselves fibbing or lying, and
Yeah.
they go, wait, no, that's not what I meant. And that can even be hyperbole. Like I have storyteller archetype. I used to be very hyperbolic in my storytelling because that's how I so communicated with my family. And now when I do this work, it's when I'm with a client, there's no hyperbole. It's energy, and I'm describing it as best I can. And so what's interesting for people is when they realize that, oh, I said something, I didn't mean that. And they go, oh, and they stop themselves and they repeat the sentence with what's actually authentic or true. If you do that and catch yourself enough times, that link becomes shorter and shorter to the point that it just falls off and you just start telling the truth.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't sound like that big of a deal. It's a really big deal.
It's huge. It
Because
changes.
when you're congruent with your own thoughts and statements, then you don't feel maligned in yourself. You don't feel taxed because you're being something you're not.
Right. It's
And
so,
sometimes saying the truth isn't good for people, right? They're going to get in trouble or this and that and the other thing. So many of my adult clients still have an internal childhood fear that they're going to get in trouble for something. Now, these are people who've never jaywalked, right? They've never cheated on their taxes. They've never jaywalked anything, but
yeah.
they still have this fear that they're going to get in trouble. And then we have these other people on our planet and our society that don't mind lying and doing just anything to get them through the day. And they wake up the next day and don't remember all the lies they told the day before. So there's a real sort of dichotomy in our society, but the people that work with people like us, or me in particular, it always ends up going to authenticity.
Yeah.
If you stay with me long enough, you're going to figure out that you are better when you are truthful to yourself.
Yes.
And that includes being truthful to the universe and the energy and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one thing you said, and I think you talked about that stream in your book, Intuitive Wellness, which if you haven't read it, it's one of the seminary necessities to reading, I think, when you're trying to get a handle on your own intuition. But I think you wrote about that stream in Intuitive Wellness, if I'm not correct, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not sure. I haven't read my own book for quite a while.
Oh, it's been like 15 years, I think. So yeah, but I think there's a part where you talk about a stream. What I want to talk about, because I know you pretty well, we are friends, just everyone can realize that. And I've noticed this with my clients, and it's something that did not happen to me as a child. But for most other people who are as intuitive or psychic as we are, they had a childhood experience that was overwhelming for them, that they tried to express to adults, and the adults like poo-pooed it or dismissed it. And so it ends up, from a very young age, we question what we see and sense. Because if we see and sense something that's beyond bricks and mortar, beyond our capacity, and then to try to describe that to an adult, we get told we're making stuff up. And so being told you're a liar for seeing the truth as a child can really be a mind-twisting event. So I have a handful of clients that, like you, have had mystical experiences at a young age, generally with other people. So it's not deniable. You can't say, oh, I just maybe imagined that, because the person next to you experienced it as well. It's like I have one client that, said to their mom, did you have a party last night? What were all those people doing in the house? And the mother said, we didn't have a party. But yet this person saw all these people, trying to meet with her in that time. And she thought they were alive and real people because she was like 7. But it was spirits trying to visit her. And so when you go to your parents and say, I had this experience, they say, no, you didn't. Well, then you try to start your intuitive life a little backwards, or with your third eye shut down a little bit. So you've had an experience similar to that, I think. And I'm
Yes.
just curious, do you encounter other people whose intuition was reduced or contracted because they weren't believed as a child?
Yes, oh, yes, it happens all the time. It starts with that sense, that feeling, even when you're pre-toddler, toddler, and then going into school, that do as I say, not as I do, piece. And the parents don't have to say that, or the caretakers don't have to say that. The child is a witness to odd behavior, or like, I can't do that, you're doing that. And it's not about you're lighting the stove and cooking dinner, I can't do that. It's not not that cognitively aware, but it's a felt sense first. And that starts rewiring the nervous system, particularly the vagal and the enteric neurons in the alimentary canal. All that gut level thing that we were talking about earlier starts to go, what's going on here? So yeah, I've had a lot of those experiences. Certainly clients do. And it happens so interestingly at those earlier years. And then we get into that psychological age range of hero worship, what's called hero worship, where Superman and Wonder Woman and Marvel Comics and all those types of superheroes come in, and we take our own superhero and we project it outside into these objects, it's objectified superheroes, and we lose our own connection to ourselves. We lose that piece. And I think that's really telling, that when we look at our own lives and then work with other people, because there are many people on this podcast that listen and will see this video that are healers and in the holistic healthcare industry, whether physician, doctors, dentists, nurses, hands-on healers, etc. This is an important age range where we lose us and then we project it outside. And then that's when we start melding into socially constructed reality even more, which jams the circuits even more. I was really lucky. I remember it's just one situation with my dad. My dad's favorite word, many of you know, is "we." So he was just that kind of joyful man. And we were in a cathedral and looking up, and I could see all the angels, and I could see the energetic constructs of prayers from present time to thousands of years ago, because these were really old. This was a really old cathedral. And I said, Daddy, look at all the angels. And he said, yeah, wow. So I grew up with that kind of support enveloped, although we didn't talk about it too much. And for me, it was at 16 where I did have a very powerful mystical experience. Lasted several hours with a young woman at a college campus in Ohio. Everything happened simultaneously. And then when we told people about it, it's like, no, come on, no. And boy, phew, both of us, the voice went silent by choice. It's like, this is not safe. I'm going underground. And I did until I got sick and died. Oops. Okay. So that kind of thing happens a lot. So did you have that experience? What was your experience like? Because I know a lot of people listening have these experiences and you can get out of them. You don't have to do what I did. You don't have to ignore it and be in that dark night for that long of a time. And the dark night, I had ups and downs in it. It was totally dark. It was shadowed, shall we say. But you don't have to die. So just don't do that. You don't have to do that. Wake up earlier. So what was yours like, Scott? What did you experience?
So, as I said, I did not have one of those overwhelmingly mystical
Yeah.
experiences growing up as a child. That's why I'm so intrigued by the conversation because so many people have had these things.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just didn't have that experience. So that's why I like to talk about it with other people because it's those experiences that said, I'm not intuitive because someone said that couldn't be possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I
Yeah.
was told a lot growing up that what I knew, there was no way I possibly could know that,
Yeah.
or that I was a snoop, or that how could you know where everything
Ah,
in the house is because you must be snooping around, or why do you know stuff about my parents at a friend's house?
yeah.
I just knew that I was picking up information and sharing it.
Yeah.
Well, when you go to your friend's house at 10 or 11 years old and you start telling them about, you know, your friend's parents' marriage that you shouldn't even know anything about, it gets a little weird, right? So
It does.
I
Yeah.
realized in my case around 11 or 12, I was being a little awkward with people. People weren't able to put in the 70s. How could this young boy know all these things that he can't possibly know? So they made up stories. And
Yeah.
it was that and the coupling that I was being perceived of as weird, or that people didn't want to invite me over anymore because I was, I knew too many things about their house or whatever it was. I said, whatever that is, stop that because I don't want to be unpopular as a teenager.
Yeah.
And so I made a conscious effort and it stopped until it
Yeah.
was undeniable and I picked it back up again. That was my personal case. It's not like that for everybody. But
Yeah.
one of the things you brought up that I think is really interesting in both of our works is if you grow up in a household and a facet of self-worth or self-esteem was not in that household, if your parents didn't have it, then you were not taught it intrinsically, and you as an adult have to learn it yourself. It's like growing a new limb,
Yeah.
right? If you have 9 trees in your yard and that's your sense of self-esteem and self-worth, acceptance, and all these trees are growing, and your parents don't have 2 of the trees, you're not going to water those trees. It's not going to exist. And you as an adult are now the responsible one to say, wow, that lacked in my household. My mother and father weren't capable of fill in the blank.
Mhm.
I can't remember that. Right? You can't remember something you weren't subjected to or
Yeah.
surrounded by. So you have to train or learn yourself to then embellish and embolden that part of you that was lacking because it wasn't around you growing up.
Yeah. True. Very true.
So that's a lot of what I do is I notice, oh, your parents didn't have a lot of self-esteem or self-worth, or, they didn't think too much about health or this or that. And then you have to learn that as an adult. You have to admit it. You
Yeah.
have to forgive the situation, even forgive your parents because they didn't know what they didn't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the most powerful thing, and I think I've mentioned this before on one of your podcasts, the most powerful thing that my clients can do is admit that their parents were fallible.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you can admit your parents were fallible, then a lot of the reasons why your energy is contracted, a lot of those reasons disappear. And then you can really get to work on some things that can help you. But
True.
if you keep saying to yourself, oh, I'm this way because my parents were this and that and the other thing, that's now your responsibility. It may
Absolutely.
have been their responsibility to teach you something, but if they didn't know it, they can't teach you calculus if they don't know calculus.
That's right.
And if
That's
they grew up in a household that didn't have self-esteem or self-worth, or that, your father was beaten by his father, there's a self-esteem issue that he's not going to be able to pass on to you.
yeah.
And so you have to show up for yourself.
Yeah, we do. We absolutely do. And to your point earlier about growing yourself up, as if you find that inner child is, you know, wounded or afraid in a corner of your own psyche, you've got to just gently come to that part of you and offer help, loving kindness, care, space, safety, and help that part of you grow up with you. And it's amazing. I've watched this, and so many people watch that inner child, that fragmented piece, grow up so quickly once they've been invited to speak again. So it's so important, the work that you do, particularly in that area. And I know your work is very broad. Whatever the issue is, you address it. And that's a good healer. That's a good intuitive, because I'm sure, and let's go here. Many people have, when they come and see me, they say, okay, I want to work on this, this, and this. Like my toe hurts and my ankle's not working and all that. And while they're saying that, another part of their body is firing off. It's like, no, I'm the issue. I'm the issue.
Mm-hmm.
That's secondary or tertiary. So talk about that in your work too. You start with something, a premise, you see something that catches your eye, so to speak, and then who else shows up, and how does that work for you?
So I personally don't work with guides or things like
I
that.
don't either.
But I can sense if your guides come down sometimes. So if you have a great grandmother that still looks in on you and things like that, like I can sense those in your energy field. I can
Sure.
see them sort of looking over your shoulder. Not something I rely on most of the time, but if it shows up, I'll deal with that. I like dealing with the person that's alive in front of me or
Yeah.
on the phone with me.
Yeah.
A lot of times that can be past life stuff or a family issue that trails down, but it's still in their body.
Mm-hmm.
Describing too much about your grandmother isn't going to help you, right? It's how
No.
that affected you and how can we effect change, right?
Mm.
And a lot of times that's observation. I say this a lot. Healing is 55% of the healing is observing the issue.
Yes.
Once you can see or sense it, and if you can't do that on your own, then you come to people like us that see it from a different lens, paradigm, perspective, whatever you want to call it. But what I really enjoy is guiding the client to heal themselves.
Yes.
I consider myself more of a librarian or a guide than an actual healer, even though I do have the healer archetype. I really would prefer to inspire the healing in the client themselves. The efficacy of that, I find, lasts longer, it's more effective, and they understand themselves more. Because I don't need to understand you. You need to understand you.
Mm-hmm.
You call me so I can help explain you back to you. Right. And so that's what I think is really rewarding in this work, when you can explain to a client a pattern and their aha moment or their light bulb goes off and says, oh, I don't have to live with this anymore.
Yeah.
When I was 6, that thing you saw, I don't have to live like that anymore.
Right.
I had a really powerful experience last year, a referral from a client. And the woman sat down and said, I struggled with my mom and she's passed on now. And she had a lot of childhood trauma with the Holocaust and things like that. And I said, wow, your mom has DID. Did anyone ever tell you your mom had, identity disorder? And she said, no, that's it. My mom never went to a psychiatrist, which most people with DID try to steer clear of psychiatrists because they can figure out what the jig is up. But to be able to have a middle-aged client whose mother has passed on, explain her childhood back to her after the fact, to say it wasn't anything you did, your mother's brain was scrambled and desperately trying to hold on to reality and not doing well, and you had to bear the brunt of that in your household. For her to be seen like that in her 50s, it changed her outlook. It changed her view of how she's going to deal with the estate. It changed the view of how she deals with her family. Because it wasn't her fault. Her mom had multiple personalities. So she didn't know at any given point of the day who she was actually interacting with. But with people with multiple personalities, and I have several clients who are affected by this, the face doesn't change. So if your face doesn't change too much, then we as humans just assume the person in front of us is the same person. But for a lot of us that struggle with family members who have DID or identity issues, the person you're interacting with could be several different people in their own psyche over the course of a day. That's not stabilizing for a child to be in that environment. But to understand it after the fact can be very cathartic and healing. And so that's kind of interesting when you see the patterns of the people interacting with the client and can help explain back to them, let's take a realistic view of what it is. My mentor used to always say, accept the existing reality. You can accept the existing reality, see the pattern or see the energy that's clogged, then you have a chance.
Yeah.
you bring in your guardian of faith, and you go to town and you start healing. So
That's beautiful. Yeah, it's so true. There's nothing like illumination to get us on a track to our authenticity. And
yeah.
we really struggle as human beings to find, and I'll put it in quotes, purpose. Everybody, so many people are, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? Well, life is your purpose, first and foremost, and to find the happiness deep inside that's clear, buoyant, accepted, and utilized. I mean, that's a purpose right there, just to find the true nature of yourself. And with that, the door is open for any kind of service that you want to give to other people, or education style that you want to give, anything you want to do, where you want to live, what you want to do. Everything hinges on that illumination that you're talking about here. It's perfect. It's beautiful.
And that's why I enjoy working with the archetypes. If you have your archetypal chart read, you know what energy patterns are coming through you or presenting to you that you have to deal with. I have a client who we read for the mother and the daughter. The daughter's a young girl, and the daughter has queen archetype. And when I told the mother, everything started to make sense.
Yeah.
I said, get your daughter a throne. She goes, every time we go shopping, she sits in the biggest chair. I said, because your daughter has queen archetype. And if you fight her on that, you're going to have issues. So you have to accept her for where she's at. So it can be really enlightening to people and illuminating to say, wow, my archetypes were this, or my partner's archetypes are that, or my mom's archetypes were this, which is why we didn't get along. And it really helps brain people. It's generally something I recommend to my clients after 3 or 4 sessions. If they're really interested in getting deep into the healing aspects of who they are, we do the clearings, the first couple of sessions, and then we delve into the archetypes. And that can really show you what your mandala, how colorful your mandala is.
Yeah.
And how you relate to the world and how the world relates to you.
And that just popped a question mark above my head. How the world relates to you. The question is, and we'll see where this one goes, do we really need to focus on how the world relates to us? I mean, yes, if you're in a supermarket, spatial awareness, I'm not talking about spatial awareness. I'm talking about emotional attention on how people feel about us. And I'm not talking about people that are close to us and people we've met who we love and care about. But do we really need to care? Because empathic people with that external locus of control, they tend to, I have so many stories on this. Walking down the street or in a crowded place, they could feel everything that's going on and they start to become more and more self-conscious. So can you talk about that a little bit? Do we really need to have that? And as an empathic person, let's narrow that question now because it's a very broad question. But as an empathic person, what are some of the things? Let's go with the archetypes. The archetypes can teach them.
I know.
Oh, I know. Back in the classroom. Yeah, it's me, call me. So run with that, Scott, because that's a really important thing, because we got to be in here and be aware of what's out there. Absolutely, without question, but no attachment. And that doesn't mean you don't care and you don't have compassion. It means that actually you have a lot of compassion for yourself and others. But okay, your turn. Run.
You're overlapping a couple of the aspects of my work. One is joy and judgment can't live in the same moment.
Yeah.
So and I talk about this all the time. If you change your judgment, which we are trained to do as Americans with TikTok and everything else and the reels and Instagram, everything's a judgment. Every mark, every label on your shirt, every BMW, it's a judgment. And if you can switch it to curiosity.
Yeah.
If you can find yourself being, oh, that was a judgmental statement. Instead of saying why, say why. Why is that person like this? Not why would that person do this to me? Find the curiosity in the moment.
Yeah.
Try to dissipate the judgment, and then joy can actually enter the room.
Yay.
But if you're overly pretentious, it means that you have a lack of something inside of you that you have to promote yourself through brands, for example. And I really have a feeling that luxury brands and things like that are going to start becoming less labeled as people start to understand this. You can still wear a fancy cashmere sweater, but does it need to have some mark on it that the person needs to judge you because you have that mark on you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's just a microcosm of our society. Judgment is everywhere.
Of course, yes.
And if you can
Right now.
switch that ideology to curiosity, you have a potential for real change.
Yeah.
And if you don't judge other people for the way they treat you and just be curious to that, it can alleviate a lot of self-maligning and self-contracting energies that we impose on ourselves. So
Beautiful.
that's one thing I would say.
Yeah.
Is joy and judgment don't live in the same moment. You have to decide.
Yeah.
And
So
if you're curious about that, change your judgment into curiosity. If you're curious how to do it, try being curious one day
yeah.
and see how your mindset shifts. Yeah.
Yeah, curiosity is my favorite, one of my favorite words. I have several and concepts, and that part is so important when you're developing the trust for your own intuitive system and the way in which it works for you, your perceptual lenses. If without curiosity and asking what's going on, what is that? That's interesting. Wow, let me take a look at that for a minute. You've got to have curiosity, or the answers do not come in the clarity that they are able to come through you without the curiosity. So bravo on that. And I love joy and judgment don't stay in the same room. That is phenomenal.
They cannot exist in the same moment.
They do not coexist. No, they don't. Joy is better. I like joy.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And then there's other aspects to outlook, inlook. As I said, accepting the existing reality.
Yeah.
If your husband is retired and you can't stand the way he chews, well, he's been chewing that way for the last 40 years. Like, you have to accept the fact that you've dealt with it all these times, and maybe there's something sort of you can look at in yourself to say, oh, I get a lot of empty nesters if you can't. Either parents whose children are gone and they're, what do I do with my energy now, right? A lot of women, their breast energy gets separated from their bodies as a parent, right? Because it's the giving act. And once your children are, if I interview a client and I say, how old are your children? And they're like 12 to 19. I go, okay, let's do it. And then we do an exercise where you actually bring the breast energy and re-implement it back into the body, so it's not separate. Your motherly instincts can come back to you again. They don't always have to be pointed outward, specifically as your children get older.
Yes.
They find that oppressive, right?
Yes,
they just want to be kept an eye on, but they don't want to be imposed upon. Whereas the mother has been giving milk and then, constant attention for so long that no one understands what's the new paradigm when puberty hits. And so that's a really fun, interesting thing to do with certain types of age clients is, reclaim what you need to do for you. Your kids are going to be fine, right?
Yes,
your kids are going to be fine. You just have to support them, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of that is, children want happy parents.
Yes, they do.
Children yearn for completed, self-aware parents. And when they don't have that, that's when the issues start. So
yes, and I've seen in clients, and I've watched my own kids do this too. To me, it's like they become a certain age and they will start parenting the parent because they're older, they're mature, they live their lives, they earn their own money, they do their own thing, they're educated. And so I just coast along with my adult children, and we have a better time. We have a great time together. I don't be that mother. I'm their mom, but I'm not mothering them. And it just works beautifully. So
good.
If you have that issue, call Scott, because because some parents will fight with the children, for the adult children, to have that position back. And they will go against, well, I'm your mother, da 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 da. And that just adds animosity. And I've seen way too many mothers suffer from their kids cutting them off and not talking to them very much because they don't let them be the adult woman or man that they are. They still trying to control or mother. And love is love. control is control, and they're not the same.
Well, and judgment is judgment.
And judgment is judgment.
If you're a 30-year-old, you don't want to hear judgment about you from your parents.
We got to figure it out anyway.
Right, exactly. The parents have to accept the existing reality as well, that your child has different archetypes than you.
Yes. Oh, gosh, yes.
Your child wants to be an engineer. Your child does not want to be a doctor. Like, that's just the way it is, or whatever that is. Yeah. So we're getting a little off tangent, but yeah.
That's okay. We do that.
That's what I help people with.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. And so speaking of that, how can people get a hold of you? Give us some information about that.
So I have a podcast that I host called the Intuitive Energy Podcast. And that's just all the information that I would have liked to have known about my intuitive nature when I was burgeoning psychic all those years ago. So I try to compile all that information in one place. And I speak about things that called to me to be speaking about. So it's an informative podcast about intuition, healing, and some psychic stuff too.
Beautiful.
I have a website, scottclover.com. I teach a class, as I said, called Coming Out Intuitive. If people are interested in that, we teach that period a couple times a year. Nice. And once again, that's about self-acceptance. But my website is the main way, scottclover.com, or on Instagram, I'm Scott Clover Intuitive Healer, I believe that's what my name is on it. I'm not so big at posting things. I feel like if somebody wants to know what I have to say, they can ask me. Sort of me imposing, my will onto people doesn't interest me so much as it might other people. Yeah. But the podcast is really just sort of a labor of love for me that I put out there periodically because I want people to be informed. And I want people to hear about intuition from a non-dogmatic standpoint.
Amen.
I want people to realize that intuition is practical. It helps us in our daily lives, in our relationships, and getting a handle on it, comes with feeling comfortable in your own body. And so that's what I help people with, is either the somatic aspects of feeling more comfortable in your nervous system and your body, and then also being more comfortable with who you are as a person, as a communicator, and as an intuitive being. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again so much for joining me on the Voice of Intuition podcast. And I love this little series we're starting to create now, 2 healers and a mic, because that's the way it rolls.
It was really well received. The first one was really well received. So I'm glad
it was just really fun. It's always good to talk with you. It's always fun to hang out with you. And if we weren't a continent apart most of the time, I'm sure we would do it more often. So thank you so much for being here. And please go to scottclover.com and check out Scott's website and listen to his podcast. And for all of you, take care. And always, always remember, when you trust yourself and listen to your intuition, that's when miracles and change follows. Take care. Until next time.